Good evening, our guests. I'd like to start by thanking you all for being here tonight and thanking our partners, MindLab, for the great opportunity. And of course, thanking our guest, الأستاذة تانيا عمايسي, for accepting our invitation. So, أهلاً وسهلاً فيكي at Showman and in Jordan. And since we are at the heart of Showman, please allow me to shift to عربي. الحقيقة وأنا كنت عم بحضر لمقدمتي قررت إني أعمل تجربة صغيرة، فنزلت على الشارع ومشيت بين الناس وسألتهم عشوائياً: إيش أول إشي بخطر على بالكم أو بتفكروا فيه لما بتسمعوا كلمة أو مصطلح التفكير التصميمي؟ تفاوتت الإجابات واختلفت. لما رجعت على البيت وقررت أحلل الإجابات إحصائياً، وجدت إنه 84.4 من الناس اللي سألتهم بالشارع قالوا التفكير التصميمي بمعنى الإرادة أو العزيمة. للوهلة الأولى حسيت واعتقدت إنه هاي الإجابة بعيدة كل البعد عن موضوع نقاشنا الليلة. حتى إني الحقيقة تناقشت مع صديق وهو موجود هون اليوم، قلت له: إيش فكرك اللي خلى الناس تفهم إنه التصميم بهذا السياق يعني الإرادة والعزيمة ومش الديزاين؟ ففكرنا كتير، وإحدى الأشياء اللي خطرت على بالنا إنه يمكن تكون المشكلة بالترجمة، design thinking، تفكير تصميمي، مع إنه هاي الترجمة مش ترجمة شومان، هاي الترجمة هي المعتمدة عربياً. فقلنا مثلاً لو طرحنا إنه يكون الترجمة اللي هي هندسة التفكير الحر، راح يضل عنا نفس سوء الفهم بالشارع أو تفسير الناس لمعنى التصميم بهذا السياق. الحقيقة لما رجعت وقريت ودرست أكتر وأنا بحضر لمحاضرتنا اليوم وبحضر لزيارة الأستاذة تانيا، وخصوصاً لما قرأت المادة اللي بعتت لنا إياها الأستاذة تانيا، اكتشفت إنه التفكير التصميمي مرتبط ارتباط مباشر بالحرية، بالمبادئ الإنسانية، مرتبط بالعدالة والمساواة والفرق بينهم، مرتبط حتى القهر الإنساني تاريخياً. فهو مرتبط إذن بحاجة الإنسان، هويته، وبالتالي كرامته. فكيف إذن ممكن تكون هاي الإجابة اللي هي إرادة الإنسان وحاجته للتغيير إجابة بعيدة كل البعد زي ما أنا اعتقدت عن موضوعنا اليوم؟ مثل ما كلياتنا بنعرف إنه الأردن بهاي المرحلة يعني بمر بحالة مخاض إصلاحي. الإصلاح ضمن أهم أولوياتنا الوطنية، بس أنا باعتقادي الشخصي إنه لا الإصلاح السياسي ولا الإصلاح الاقتصادي ولا حتى إصلاح التعليم رح يكون حقيقي وصادق إن لم يكن الإنسان هو محوره بل ومحركه. وبما أنه شومان لم تكن يوماً بعيدة أو على هامش الحدث التنويري الأردني، ولم تكن شومان يوماً على هامش الحدث التنويري العربي والعالمي، وبما أنه بوصلة شومان كانت دائماً هي تقديم الأفضل للإنسان، من هون قررت شومان إنه يكون موضوعنا هو التفكير التصميمي، ومن نفس المنطلق كان اختيار شومان للأستاذة تانيا عمايسي. عمايسي المحاضرة في مدرسة التصميم التابعة لجامعة ستانفورد الأميركية، وهي المؤسسة والرئيسة التنفيذية لبيتنا للتصميم. هي أيضاً مؤسسة ومشاركة في إنشاء ونشر مبدأ ومفهوم التفكير التصميمي الحر، وإطلاق ممارسات جديدة تعتمد على تموضع الإنسان في قلب التصميم، آخذة بعين الاعتبار القوى التي تتنازعه والسياق التاريخي للإنسانية وما تعرضت له من قمع أو قهر تاريخياً. تقود وتشجع الابتكار في محاور متعددة مثل التعليم، العمل الحكومي، والعدالة الجنائية. بالإضافة لما ذكر، لا تزال عمايسي تمارس دورها كمعلمة وميسرة لتجارب وتعلم فرق ومجموعات تضم أكثر من 900 متعلم من كل أنحاء العالم. We welcome you again. We are very excited to hear and learn from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. All right. Good evening, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Tanya. أنا لبنانية بس أعيش بكاليفورنيا وبحكي عربي مكسر. So I'm going to do this in English. I apologize. So while we wait for the slides to start, she already gave me a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and in particular to talk about design thinking, which is something that started in Silicon Valley in California about 15 years ago, but now is being used across the world. And for some, this might be familiar, and for some, it might be new. But I'm excited to share more about it. Okay. So my name is Tanya. I'm the founder and CEO of Bيtna Design. And Bيtna Design, I founded after my time at the D School. So the Stanford University D School is an innovation hub. It's an institute, and where students from all programs at Stanford can come to learn design thinking, to apply the process to what they study. So I joined the D School several years ago and became a lecturer. I also worked in their international programs in 11 different countries, trying to understand how is design applied across the world and across different sectors. So I left to start Bيtna Design, and working mostly in the social sector. So I work a lot with education partners, with different universities, and also education programs for children. And then I've worked with government partners at the city and county level, with philanthropists, as well as with healthcare. So the world of design thinking can be applied in any sector, and I choose to do social work. But I'll speak both to some business cases and social cases today. So more about us, we're an equity design firm, which I'll explain more as we continue. And we're looking at addressing root causes of inequity. So where at a systems level are people suffering and experiencing injustice, and how can we use design to redesign those systems to impact the lives of people living in inequity? So I'll start by saying I truly believe that we are all designers. And what I mean by that is that a designer is someone who makes decisions that impact the wellness and potential of others. So a parent is a designer, a flight attendant, an architect, a nurse, anyone that's making decisions that impact others is a designer. So I would argue that you are all designers. And the decisions that we make every day are design decisions that impact other people. We can either be mindless about our decision-making process and just doing it because we have a lot of work to do and we have a lot to get done, or we can be deeply mindful about how we make decisions and if those decisions are impacting the type of work we want to see and bring into the world. So I will speak today about liberatory design thinking, which is a process that I co-created with colleagues, which is an advanced version of design thinking. And the purpose of this process is to help us be extremely mindful about how we make decisions and therefore how we are impacting other people. I want to share a couple definitions. You'll see me use these words today, so I'm going to clarify now. Equality is different from equity. Equality is when we're in the state of being equal, especially with regards to status, rights, or opportunities. Equity is different. Equity as an outcome means that what each individual experiences as outcomes are no longer tied to an aspect of their identity. So I'll speak a lot to my experience in the United States, but if you're born in poverty in the United States, if we live in an equitable country, that will no longer limit your opportunities. If you are born a woman, if you are born a person who is not white, in a state of equity, that would not limit you from succeeding and achieving what is important to you. I'll also use the word oppression, and what that means, the definition is prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. So a word that's used to describe this that's a little bit softer is discrimination. But oppression means at a systematic level and in many ways limiting or restricting people outside of their control in many cases. So to explain this in a visual, equality would say if people are trying to run a race, give them the same size shoe. Because if we give everybody the same thing, then it's fair. But equity would say, actually, we need to give people shoes that fit. Because if someone has a small foot and a very large shoe and they don't win the race, we say, oh, it's their fault. They had the chance. We gave them a shoe. But that's not fair. So equity is about giving people what they need to succeed, and sometimes that's not the same as other people. I'm actually not going to use those. Okay, so an example visually, equality would be give everyone the same thing. But you see in this scenario that they're at different places. For example, if someone is born into poverty, they have less access than someone who is born wealthy. So if we say give them the same thing, some people still can't see the game. They still can't participate, or they're barely able to participate. So equity would say give them what they need to succeed. So if they're born with more barriers, then that might mean that we need to give them different experiences, in this case boxes, to be able to participate fully. Our goal is to design for equity, not equality, but to design for equity. And in order to create equitable outcomes in our fields, we have to design equitably. So what I was saying about making decisions in a way that is equitable, that is how we achieve the equitable outcomes we want to see. Designing in status quo ways creates status quo outcomes. And what I mean by status quo is if we keep making decisions the way we always have. So a lot of times I'll work with my clients and they'll say, I don't understand why, but some of our students aren't succeeding in our programs. Or some of our colleagues are not succeeding at work. And we know they're talented, it's something that we're doing. And so I'll ask, we cannot work the same ways and expect things to change. In order to change what's happening, we have to change how we work. So that's what liberatory design thinking is, and that's why I believe it's the future of work. Because if we can change that, then so will our outcomes change. So I've said that we need to change how we work in order to change the outcomes. I want to make the case that history is a series of design decisions, in many cases that were designed on purpose to exclude people and oppress them, and sometimes unintentionally, which is, I think, more in the work that we do now is unintentional. So I'll share some examples and then make the case for how we can shift that and avoid that. So the systems that we experience now were designed to produce the outcomes that we see. I'll give you a couple examples. This is an example of design for exclusion. Thomas Jefferson, he's one of the founding fathers of the United States. He was discussing how are we going to set up public education in the US. He proposed a 2-track system. So we'll have 2 tracks for students. One is for the laboring class, so those that have lower income and that work, and then one for the learned class, so those that are more wealthy and have access to education. He said some students from the laboring class can advance to the learned track by raking a few geniuses from the rubbish. So basically, in the foundation of our public education system, he was saying those that are less wealthy and that are working are not intelligent, and only a few of them who are smart enough can advance. That was his intent, was to design for exclusion, to separate people and to limit people's opportunities. Thankfully, he was overruled. That did not happen, but you could argue our system has a lot of flaws today. Another example, this is more personal. I went to a private school called Pulaski Academy in Arkansas in the United States. And there was an event in which this photo, you can see that there are white people yelling at this black student who's attempting to enter a public school. In the United States, they decided that it was unconstitutional to segregate public schools. So they had schools separate. One school was only for white children, and one school was only for black children. They were not allowed to mix. So the United States decided that is no longer constitutional. Black students are allowed into white schools. But this is how parents reacted. So parents missed work to come so they could harass the black students on the first day they were entering the school. The governor of the state actually fought the national decision and tried to send military to block them from entering. Okay, so while this was happening, obviously a lot of white parents were upset that black students were entering their schools. So they founded a lot of private schools. Because in the United States, you have a lot of freedom in a private school. I later found out the private school I attended was created for white flight. which means that the families who did not want their children to be in school with black children created a separate private school in which they would find legal ways to not admit black students. The reason I share this story is because it speaks to over history. It would be nice to say, oh, thank God those times are over. But the reality is that the legacy of them is still hurting us. So as an Arab family living in Arkansas and attending this school, we were discriminated against severely. There were only 2 children that were expelled from the school, a Turkish child and my brother, a Lebanese child. Our experience was a legacy of the generations of people who led this school. So we are still suffering from some of the design decisions that people made decades ago. I'll share a more modern example. This is how I would think of sort of unintentional exclusion, but still with negative outcomes. So facial detection algorithms that have been developed are trained on images from media databases, like Google Images, to detect faces. Most of the images on those search engines are white, because in the United States, most of the photos they take of people are of white people. So they're having issues with the computer systems. Passport systems that use this software incorrectly read Asian faces as having their eyes closed, which is racist. Also, the Microsoft Kinect, which uses similar software, it struggles to detect black faces. This is a researcher at MIT. The only way she could get the software to detect her face is if she put on a white mask. Google Photos and Flickr were auto-tagging faces of black people as belonging to apes, which is a racist message that was used in the United States to degrade and dehumanize black people by saying that they are not intellectual, they are apes. So you can see unintentionally with modern designers, we are building racism and oppression into our products. So that is why I'm arguing not to say we are bad people, it is that unintentionally we have been programmed to believe certain things, and unintentionally we are putting those into our designs. So that's why I was motivated to create this process. How can we be mindful and build it into our process to question ourselves and what we're designing? Here's the good news. If inequity and oppression were designed, they can be redesigned by us. But we need to redesign design. And what I mean by that is we need to change the way we work. Because the way we work now is accidentally producing outcomes we do not want to see. Okay, so now to the core question, what is design thinking? What am I talking about? This is a creative problem-solving process that teams use to generate innovations that are human-centered. So I will explain quickly what each step is. The first, empathize. What that means is to connect deeply with people and to seek to understand them. So the first step is we want to understand the people we're trying to help. Then the second step is once we understand them, we can define the problem. So I studied mechanical engineering. They told us, you don't need to talk to people, you are the expert, you know what to make. But actually design is saying you don't know what the core problem is, you need to talk to people first. Then the second half of the phase, this one in orange is called ideate, which means to brainstorm. We're going to generate lots of options, not go with our first idea. Then we're going to build a prototype. A prototype is a small, cheap, tangible version of our idea that we can test. So we're going to go back to people in the second half of the process and say, is this idea worth pursuing? Did we understand them and empathize correctly, or were we mistaken? So the idea is that before we invest so much in idea that we came up with behind closed doors, let's understand people and quickly test to see if we're on the right track. What's core to the belief of the practice of design thinking is the belief that innovation is not an event, but rather a process. So it's not only some people, like Einstein, who are in the shower and all of a sudden, oh, they have an amazing idea, and that only them can be creative. Actually, we think that everyone is creative, and that this process is a way to bring that out of them. I want to name also that design thinking is not just for products. People often ask me when they find out I'm a designer, what do you make? Do you make chairs? Do you work in fashion? I could, but I don't. You can produce experiences, programs, services, products, even policies. There's a lot of government work being done around designing policies using design thinking. So you can apply it to anything. It's about the process, not the product, per se. So how is it different from how we normally work? I spoke to some of these already. The first is that the problem is defined by the people we talk to, not by only our expertise or other case studies. Work is done on teams. So you work with a team in a collaborative way, often from people who are in different offices at work or from different sectors than you, because the diversity brings more creativity to the process. It acknowledges that everyone is creative. Like I said, everyone has equal status on the team. It is cyclical. So every time that you learn something new, you are changing the product, outcome, service. And it allows you to develop and quickly test concepts. So it moves very quickly. Some of the benefits is that the things that you produce, that you design, are more effective because you've already spent a long time understanding the people. So it's not like make, show it to them, and really hope it works. They've been involved throughout, so you have a higher chance of success. The community is more likely to be bought in because you've been asking them. So by the time the program is ready to launch, a lot of them are enlisted and interested in seeing you succeed. It reduces the time and cost needed to produce something. And also, the last two are about the team. It's also very fun and very meaningful work. So we see a lot of teams at companies find increased motivation, deeper connections with each other, and deeper connection to the company and their mission. I'll share a quick case study. Don't worry if you can't read this, I will read it to you. This is in Warsaw, Poland. A government team was trying to support those who are visually impaired, so blind or visually impaired, to navigate government services. They had a hard time accessing, for example, buses or reaching locations like the library. So they developed an app before Google Maps that would audibly give directions. So while they're walking, it would tell them turn right, turn left. They built the product, they hired the best engineers, then they started to test it after they invested a lot of time. And what they found is those that were visually impaired could not use it. They said that the way that I am trained to stay safe is that I'm listening for dogs, for cars, for traffic signals. So if I'm trying to listen and your app is barking instructions at me, I cannot navigate the city. So at this point, the team had the humility to say, it's not too late, we can fix it. So they actually recruited people from the visually impaired community to work on their team, and they redesigned the product to be according to what would actually work for them. That's a case where they adopted design and were able to shift the outcome of the project and save it, in this case, from being a bit of a failure. I want to share another story. This one is told often in our circles because we appreciate this man so much. Doug Dietz was a product designer at General Electric. He was very proud. Him and his team spent years building this MRI scanner, which is used for a lot of medical scans. He went, when the first one was installed in a hospital, to see it in action. So he went to see the scan, and what he saw was a small girl with her mother sobbing, deeply upset. And her mother was telling her, we talked about this, you can get through this, it's gonna be okay. He looks at the technician who's running the test, almost in tears, saying, I hate my job. We have to sedate 80% of children when they take this scan because of how terrified they are. Doug was crushed by this. He's a very empathic, loving person. He said, I can't believe I spent years designing something that is hurting people. I'm gonna take it on myself to redesign this. So his team at General Electric, his superiors, were like, we don't know about this design thinking thing. We don't have time for it, we don't have money for it, you can't do it. So he recruited colleagues and they worked on it after hours and on the weekends. They worked with children at children's museums, with experts for who design fun experiences for children, and with families, and with medical technicians. This is what they created from what they learned. This is called the Adventure Series. As you can see, he changed the entire experience into a game. When they talked to a lot of the children, they heard things like, my brother gets to go to summer camp and be on sports teams, but I don't get to do any of that because I'm sick. So he thought, how could we bring an adventure to the hospital? This is another example. This one's an underwater theme. So the technicians wear costumes. The students or the children get a backpack in advance that tells them about the adventure that they're going on and what it would feel like. They have music that is timed to the heartbeat of the children so that they're at the appropriate heartbeat for the MRI. And they even have scents that they spray. So I believe it's this one has the scent of pina colada being sprayed into the room, mostly for the parents, as you can imagine. So the result of this project is that patient satisfaction at hospitals increased by 95%. They went from having to sedate 80% of children to less than 0.01%. So in 1 year, they had only sedated 2 children. And from a business case, suddenly Doug's higher-ups were very interested because hospitals were choosing GE products specifically because they wanted the experience. So they were getting contracts over competitors because the patient satisfaction was so high. So now, of course, at General Electric, Doug leads a whole team that's focused on using design to drive innovation. Okay, so this is where I shift. I am a designer by training. I worked at the D School. I have a deep passion for this process, but we almost broke up. We almost fell apart, me and design thinking, because I started to see ways where it was failing us. I was seeing communities that felt abused and that felt hurt, and that we were being used for profit so that companies could benefit from what they heard from their life experiences. I started to notice that some projects were focused on symptoms. So let's fix and put a Band-Aid over here to make this experience better, but then something in the system changes, and that's no longer relevant. Or we're not addressing the root cause that would eliminate that problem in the first place. So there's a couple others, but I just want to speak to those. So I went through the process of saying, okay, I'm dedicated to this is my career, there has to be a better way to do this, in which the design is working at a systems level and is honoring people, not hurting them. So I created liberatory design thinking with colleagues, which is a mix of design and equity work. So equity work, there's a long legacy around how do you change people's mindsets, how they behave, how they treat each other. This work is deeply important, but sometimes people talk and talk and talk and aren't able to take action. Design is really good at getting people to take action, but sometimes we move too fast and we hurt people. So we got together and we were like, listen, you got good stuff, we got good stuff, what could we build together to make it even better? This is the process. It's very similar to the other visual you saw. The main point is that it is cyclical and that we added 2 key elements called notice and reflect. And I will speak to both of them. It is a merge of design thinking, equity practice, like I mentioned, and also systems thinking tools, which gets to the question of how do we address the root causes? This is my team. I want to appreciate them by putting their faces up here. We worked together for several months, and we created a card deck. I would love to give you the PDF if you'd like, to communicate our core ideas. I want to name also that we have formed a collaborative. So we started to do this work, and we started to meet people across the nation that were having the same conversation, that were saying, I love design, but it needs something more. So we've created a collaborative. You can see there's groups across the nation doing this work. And of course, it's happening abroad too. We're meeting people every day that are doing this work. So it's exciting. I share this to say it's a movement. And I've just started to meet people that call their form of design different things, but have the same goal, which is how do we create more equitable outcomes? And I love this image because it speaks to the volume of like, this is a movement within design, it is coming. These are the mindsets associated with liberatory design that we created. So there is a process, which is tangible tools, but there are also mindsets. So how do we behave with each other? How do we view the world? And how do we collaborate? I'll show you a few that I think are important. One up here is to recognize oppression. So if we're looking at a challenge, for example, we could say, parents Parents who are immigrants, they're not coming to public school to support their students. Maybe it's because they and their kids do not care about education. I would argue that's probably not the case. There's probably another reason that they're not coming, or many reasons. So we need to look at the system and understand oppression. Are they afraid of the government? Because our government right now is very scary and afraid to reveal their name or their identity at risk of being deported. That is an element of oppression that could be influencing their experience. That's just one example. So as a team, we dedicate to research and understand what these people are experiencing that they may not tell us, but that we know is true. Another I'll highlight is to embrace complexity. So I was speaking earlier that we want to address root causes, not symptoms, and that's what this speaks to. The system is complex, and the only way we can start to understand it is by experimenting. These are also in the PDF I can share with you. So now I want to highlight a couple of the tools and the phrases in what is different. So what are we doing that's different? The first is notice, I mentioned earlier. There are 3 core elements. One is identity. Who am I? What does it mean for me, for example, to come to Jordan and do work? I'm not going to be the head of the project because I'm not local. So my identity is different. I don't understand the local context. That will change how I work and my power on the team. The second is power. Are there power dynamics between us? It's okay if there are, but we need to name them so that they don't become disruptive. And are there power dynamics between the people we interview? Will they be harmed by that? Will they feel threatened by us? How can we mitigate that? The last is looking at current and historical context. So speaking back to recognize oppression, what is happening now in the government, in schools, in the healthcare system, and how did we get there? What design decisions from, for example, Thomas Jefferson, no thank you, Thomas, that got us here? These are a couple of the different tools I have developed and use. I won't explain all of them, but basically they're exercises for us. I think of them like at a bowling alley. When you're learning how to bowl, you put on the bumpers, and if you mess up, there's a bumper to push you back in the right direction. So these tools are mostly reflection and team tools to help us recognize when we might be making mistakes and accidentally building bias into our designs. Here's one example. It's called the Paseo Protocol. It's an identity exercise. So this is mine. I filled out elements of my identity. I name what my values are in life, if I might have potential biases. So for example, I put on here that I live in California. That impacts how I view the world. I'm also Lebanese and American. That changes how I view the world. And then at the right, it's ability to influence design decisions. So basically, how much power do I have on the team? Often a lot, because I'm a designer by trade. So I name it for myself to remember that I'm not dominating conversation, that I'm not threatening anyone, that I'm welcome to participate, but I should be mindful. The second core element is reflect. So this is being mindful of our team collaboration. Are we taking care of each other? Are we stopping when something goes wrong to heal our relationship? It also speaks to community involvement. So how are we treating the community? Are we respecting the work they're already doing? Are we coming to them with humility? Do they trust us? And the last is current context. So what is happening day by day that will impact our project? These are some of the tools as well. I've spoken to some of them already, so I'm going to keep moving to share other options. So the mindset tools, one of the way we use this card deck is as a team, we ask ourselves, which are most important to us to practice? It's also a way to name when something is not going well. So for example, let me think of the last time I used one of these. There's one on the right that says bias towards experimentation. So if we're talking too long, it's been days, maybe a week, and we haven't tried anything, someone on the team might pull the card and say, hey, I'm noticing we haven't experimented or tried anything in a while. And then we as a team are like, oh yeah, good reminder, thank you, thank you. So we use them as a way to remind ourselves how we are designing. The last I'll show is an adaptation of the define phase. So how we define the problem has, in many cases, I would say, the most impact on what we're able to create. So I would suggest, I shared this with folks in the workshop yesterday, we need to break up with our solutions and fall in love with the problem. There will be a time for solutions, but it's at the very end, not the beginning. I'll share this quote from Einstein. He said, if I were given 1 hour to save the planet, I would spend 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute resolving it. This is a framework introduced to me by my colleague that helps us understand what kind of problem do we have. Obvious is a problem that we see all the time. There's a recipe for how to fix it. It's easy, we got this. We'll repeat what others have done. A complicated problem, it's like, I'm not sure where to start. I'm pretty sure there's an expert who does. Let's find the expert. Complex is where we really don't know. The system is so entangled in itself that if we change one thing over here, it changes 5 things over here, and we have no idea why. So I would argue this is where design is most impactful. It says here that your approach needs to be emergent, which means you need to be highly flexible and experimenting. The problem we see is often we have this kind of problem, but we think it's that. So we throw experts and consultants and case studies at it, and it just gets more chaotic. So this is where we're often working when we're doing social impact work, and I would argue that's why we often need to use design. Okay, I'll give you a quick case study where how the problem was defined drastically impacted the outcome. This was in rural India. A nonprofit told a group of our students at the D School, we need cheaper incubators. For babies who are born prematurely, they need to be kept warm and safe from infection. Make us a cheaper incubator. So as a team, diverse team, some in healthcare, some in engineering, we're focused on building a cheaper incubator. Their designs got close to $9,000, normally it's $10,000, cutting more, a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there. Then the design team said, I think you should go to India. You should just figure out what's happening before you invest too much in building this. So they went, and what they found is that the hospital had 5 empty incubators. The hospital already had incubators, but they were empty. So they started to ask, where are the babies? And what they heard is that the women giving birth in the villages to a premature baby, the journey is so rough and so long that the baby dies before it even gets to the hospital. So the team thought, this is not about incubators. This is about keeping babies warm in the villages, so they don't even have to come to the hospital. So on the ground, they said, how could we quickly experiment with how to do this? They bought a sleeping bag, and they created their first prototype. It's very cute. They tested many versions over the course of years, and this is the current design. It has a gel inside that a mother can heat by boiling it in water. So all she needs is access to boiling water. It cannot get too hot, so it won't hurt the baby, and it tells her when it gets too cold, so she can reheat it. The original cost of an incubator is $10,000. This one costs $20. They've reached over 300,000 babies in over 22 countries. These are examples. A colleague of mine, Dr. Christine Ortiz, started to ask, what mistakes are we making? Why are we not defining the problem correctly? It's difficult, but how could we do it better? So I'll share with you 6 ways that she articulated. 1, we're stating the problem as the absence of the thing we want to build. So the problem is we do not have a computer software that would expedite patient entry at the hospital. That's not a problem, that's a solution. The second is that the problem doesn't mention any people. So we might say healthcare is broken. Well, who's impacted? Who is creating that problem? There's no people present. The third is that the problem is attributed to flaws or deficiencies in a group of people. So the example I gave earlier, we would say parents are not coming to the school because they don't care about education. That's not true. We're blaming them. But often we might be responsible. What are we doing? What design decisions are we making that is creating that behavior. I would argue it is never to our benefit to blame someone. That means we do not understand the problem. Fourth, I've mentioned this, the problem talks about a symptom, but not the root cause. So we're stuck in a very low-level intervention. The fifth, the problem does not acknowledge the impact of institutional or systemic oppression. So I spoke to this a little bit earlier. We're looking at just the individual or the community, but not the system around them that restricts them. We cannot understand their experience without understanding the system. The last is that the problem is focused on today without an understanding of historical context. If we don't understand how we got to this problem, we cannot understand how to undo it. Okay, I'll give one last case study, which is designing at the margins. So a key element of liberatory design, this language also from a colleague, Christine, is that we do not design for the majority, we design for those most impacted by the problem, because that will help everyone. So this is an example. A designer wanted to create kitchen products for his wife who had arthritis. The people at the kitchen companies were not interested in buying his line because they said the amount of people with arthritis is too small. That's not a big market, we're not gonna make money. He said, I'm gonna make it anyway. It's now one of the top-selling brands in the United States because if it's easy for someone to use with arthritis, then it's easy for everyone. Kids can use it. Kids can use it. Anyone that experiences any kind of pain. If it's easier to open a jar with arthritis, it's much easier to open a jar for anyone. Last example is the curb cut. So people in the United States, activists, worked for years to get the curb lowered so that people in wheelchairs could move through public spaces without having to ramp off of curbs. This benefits a lot of people. What about people with strollers or suitcases or even bicyclists? So the argument is we're not going to design for the majority. We're going to design for the people who are looking for the most, who need the most shift in how things are done, because that will benefit us all. Okay, I'm almost done. I would believe that if we change how we design and how we work, we will shift the future of this nation. I would invite you to design for equity together, and this is a new field, so I invite you to join me in building the field, practicing it, and shifting how we design everyday decisions. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.